guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
In my line of work, you gotta keep repeating things over and over and over again for the truth to sink in. You gotta catapult the propaganda. You gotta catapult the propaganda. Propaganda, 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 propaganda.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we have Dennis McKenna. He was a part of two really good documentaries that are currently on Netflix. I highly recommend. One called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. The other one called Neurons to Nirvana, Understanding Psychedelic Medicines. He's also part of the Heffter Research Institute. And he's also very well known for his relationship with his brother. Him and his brother just being very popular in the psychedelic culture and researching them and really sparking these conversations and getting information out there and helping people look at psychedelics and these plant medicines differently and from a different perspective. And he wrote a book called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, which I'll link to in the show notes. So if you go to our YouTube channel, Dennis did call in using video, so you'll be able to see me and Dennis have our conversation. And if you want to do that, and in the show notes, in the show description, whatever you want to call it, I'll have the links to his book and his website and all his work. So check that out. And awesome conversation. He might sound familiar if you guys think that maybe his name or his voice sounds familiar. His voice might sound familiar because I sample him in one of my songs, The Ripple Effect, which is a song that influenced the title of this podcast. And I'll put that at the end of this podcast, so if you guys want to check out that song. And of course, if you like the music, the Theory 6 Music Project is a great way of helping the show. If you purchase some Theory 6 music, all that money goes to helping the show, and you can get Theory 6 music anywhere. You can get digital downloads, and you can also find those links in the show description. But like I was saying, if his voice sounds familiar, you probably have heard him on some of the podcasts that I'm a fan of, and I'm sure probably my listeners are also fans of. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast a few times. He's been on London Real. He's been on Tangentially Speaking with Chris Ryan. So his voice might sound familiar. So thanks again, guys. Remember, if you want to help the show, purchase some Theory 6 music. If you want to see the video version of the episode, go to RV Theory 6 on YouTube, or just look up the Ripple Effect Podcast and subscribe to our channel. Also, rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to the show. Please rate us. It'd be really appreciated. And I think that's it. I'll keep this intro short. I did a couple long intros. And like I said, I'll end the podcast with the song that Dennis McKenna was sampled in. And it's a song about consciousness and expanding the fact that, or expanding our thinking and accepting the fact that we don't know everything. And we still have a lot to understand about the world and universe and how everything works. And I have samples from Graham Hancock, Joe Rogan, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Dennis McKenna, and some other people. Ben Bolin from Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, who's also been on the podcast before. So yeah, enjoy the show, and I'll see you guys on the next one. And I'm sure you'll be excited that this intro is less than 4 minutes. All right, guys, thanks. I'll talk to you on the next one. Peace. Thanks so much for being with me. I mean, I this is a topic, or I guess it's not just one topic, but it's many topics that I've been really excited to talk about on the show. I've been trying to get Graham Hancock on. We've been, he's been very busy, so it's been very hard to get him on. And So it's been a combination of you, Graham Hancock, and somebody from MAPS. So I just been really anxious to get somebody on to talk about these type of topics. So I'm really excited to have you on, and you really know your shit, and you're quite the historic. You and your brother are quite the historic figure in psychedelic drugs, and your knowledge is unbelievable. So hopefully I can share with my listeners some, for people who haven't been exposed to these type of topics, this type of information. I'm a huge fan of alternative medicines too, and natural remedies, and the fact that homeopathic doctors and medicine is kind of looked at as pseudoscience now, and so I actually just watched not too long ago Neurons to Nirvana, and which you were in, which was awesome. It really was a good documentary, and really went into all the benefits that these plants have, besides obviously having a psychedelic experience. And but before I get too carried away, is there anything you want? Did I cut you off?
Not at all. No, actually, I think you gave a very good introduction to the whole thing. Most people read like 2 paragraphs of my resume, and I get so tired of that because, in the first place, it's too long, and in the second place, people will say, well, let's just get to it. So thank you, and thank you for the compliments, and I'm happy to come on your show. This is a passionate topic for me. I'm very interested in all of this, have been for longer than I like to remember.
Well, yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
So it's great to talk to people about it, and
yeah, we can start. We can start there. Actually, how you got involved in this, because I know it had something to do with your brother going to the Amazon. You and your brother going to the Amazon, and I also believe you guys were friends with Tim Leary, who actually was born and I believe went to school nearby me. I live in Ludlow, Massachusetts, which is right next door to Springfield, Massachusetts. So I know he grew up locally too, from around here. So, and I know he was a huge influence, and he was a part of the Harvard experiments, and which I think spawned a couple other ones too. Like I believe, didn't he end up influencing like some prison experiment too, which was they were messing up,
some of the early research was about using LSD to help prisoners, and to help prisoners get some insights into their existential situation, and hopefully avoid coming back into prison after they've been released. And they had really promising research, that early work that Leary did when he was still a Harvard professor and still respectable, and LSD was not illegal at that time, and there was great promise, and there was great interest in it, and and so it was very promising. And it's just an example of one of many things that that basically LSD and other hallucinogens, but primarily LSD in the 60s showed so much promise for all sorts of things, like recidivism in prisoners, like alcoholism and drug abuse, and all this stuff was basically shut down at the end of the 60s, and there was sort of a hysterical knee-jerk reaction, because the 60s was a time of cultural ferment and revolution, and God knows Terence and I were deeply into that, and very much influenced by our hallucinogen experiences, our experiences with LSD, and then later DMT, which was for us a real discovery, and to us it seemed like the most significant thing that we stumbled on in our experiment with psychedelics, and that was what motivated us to go to South America in the first place, was looking for this exotic form of DMT that we thought would be orally active. It was reported as being orally active, and our encounters with synthetic DMT in Berkeley and San Francisco in the late 60s were amazing and overwhelming, but also, DMT only lasts 15 minutes when you smoke it. So it's overwhelming, but you can't bring a lot back from that dimension. And so we thought, well, if we can find an orally active form, it will last longer, and we can appreciate what is going on in this world, in this dimension. I mean, our motivation was really that naive. There wasn't any other reasoning beyond that. And so we, when our encounters with DMT led us to think that, we sort of abandoned our political activism. We abandoned our academic aspirations and all this stuff at that time, because we felt that DMT is the holy grail, in a sense. And we stumbled on this paper that Schultes had published in the Harvard Botanical Museum leaflets that described this orally active form of DMT derived from a tree called Verola. The genus is Verola, and Verola is used in South America as a source of snuffs, and a lot of other tribes use it as a snuff. The resin, the sap of Verola, is jammed with DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT and other things. Other tribes use it as a snuff, but this one tribe, the Witoto, had this orally ingested preparation of it, and that was unusual at the time. And we thought that's what we need to go for. So that's what led us to go down to South America. That isn't what turned out to be the real secret. In a sense, when we finally got there, it proved a challenge to get this material called ukuhe. The Witoto called it ukuhe. And so we went to La Chirera in 1971, because it was the ancestral home of the Witoto, and that was where this collection was made. That's where the paper that Schultes published, was talking about. So we thought, well, we have to go there to go for it, to get it. And so we did. And it took a while to get that material, but in the meantime, I don't know if you've read my book. This would be a good time to plug it, but my book, in my memoir, it's all described as, and also in Terence's book called True Hallucinations. We were driven, basically. We just felt that DMT was worth going after, that it was a true mystery in a certain sense, and certainly in our world it was a mystery, and it was more important than anything we'd ever stumbled across. So we thought, we have to go after this thing, we have to go after this special form of DMT, so that we can understand it, basically, and understand what is going on in that dimension. What we didn't really understand at the time, which was really sort of brought home to us when we went to La Chirera, and we found all these psilocybin mushrooms growing there, and we knew what they were because we'd done our homework. We were not aware, we were not clear enough on, I guess, we weren't clear enough about what we were really doing. I mean, in fact, all that early stage can be thought of as a kind of misadventure in some way. We didn't realize that psilocybin turns out to be the real mystery, in the sense that it is the perfect orally active form of DMT, and that's what we were looking for. Psilocybin is converted to psilocin in the body, and psilocin is the active form of psilocybin, and psilocin is very, very close structurally to DMT. I don't know if you know this, or if this is confusing.
No, I know this in the sense I've heard you say it, but it is a little confusing because it's out of my realm, which is good, because sometimes I have guests on that I I know a lot about and stuff like that, and then I forget that I might have
Right.
listeners who might not be so familiar with their work, and then I won't ask those questions that they're thinking of. So this is good because even though I've heard you on Joe Rogan, on London Real, I mean, I sampled some of your lines in one of my songs, which I sent to you, and the song called The Ripple Effect, which is actually what influences podcasts, and that song was basically about this idea of expanding consciousness and how we still have such little understanding of our surroundings and what reality is and all that stuff, and that's basically what the song was about. And I sampled one of your interviews for that song, and so a lot of this stuff is intriguing as hell. But it is for somebody like myself who isn't an expert in this field. It definitely. Sometimes I've heard it before, but I don't quite understand the essence of what, certain things are, or what exactly is MDMA compared to the street version of ecstasy, and all those type of intricate
Right.
stuff. So believe me,
Right.
feel free to talk to me like I'm an idiot, because it'd probably be helpful, just further explaining some things.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get you or your listeners bogged down in a chemistry lesson here. I mean, nothing could be more boring, but just to briefly explain what it is. So DMT is a dimethyltryptamine, right? That's what DMT stands for, dimethyltryptamine. It's a very simple molecule, and psilocin. So if DMT is dimethyltryptamine, the chemical name for psilocin is 4-hydroxy-dimethyltryptamine. So what that will tell the chemists in the audience is that there's a hydroxy group, an OH group, what they sometimes call an alcohol group, on the psilocybin molecule, on the ring, on the 4 position of the ring. That makes it just different enough from DMT that it is actually orally active, and it doesn't require an MAO inhibitor, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, like DMT does if it's going to be orally active. And that's the basis of ayahuasca pharmacology, is it's a combination of 2 plants, one of which contains DMT and the other contains these beta carbolines in like the Banisteriopsis vine, the other component of the mixture, and those inhibit MAO. They inhibit this enzyme in the gut that will inactivate DMT, that will cause DMT to break down. So you basically you block that process. So then DMT is absorbed in the intact form and enters the brain in the intact form.
Well, that's crazy.
And it's orally active.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about ayahuasca is, like, how do they ever figure this out with so many different types of plants and stuff like that? You have one plant that has DMT, but your body doesn't activate it, and then you need this other plant to basically activate it in your body while digesting it. And they're 2 completely different plants. And some way, I mean, what have you researched? Like, who found this out initially, or how did they? I mean, I've heard them say the plants told them, or
the shamans will always tell you that the plants told them. That's the standard rap. How did you find this out? And out of the 80,000 or so species of plants in the Amazon, it's a region of enormous biodiversity. How did you figure out if you take this one plus that one, and you brew them together, you come up with an active preparation? And if you took either one by itself, not very much would happen. How did they figure this out? I can tell you, number one, nobody really knows.
Yeah, that's
I mean, that's the $64 question. If you accept what the shamans say, that somehow the plants tell them, well, how do we fit that into, our Western reductionist perspective? What I can tell you, we don't have a definitive answer, but a lot of people have pondered this. And what I can tell you is there are now traditions, or there is evidence for in northern Colombia and Venezuela back in many thousands of years ago, or a couple thousand years ago, I guess I should say, because we don't really know how old ayahuasca is. Archaeologically, it's very hard to nail down, but we know that there were traditions where DMT-containing snuffs were used, and Banisteriopsis was used as essentially as a chewing stick. They would chew the bark, they would chew the vine for some effect, mainly a kind of a sedative effect. It's probably in that context that somehow these two were accidentally combined. This is pure speculation, but it makes sense, and that's probably well it happened.
Yeah, and DMT, your brain naturally produces it, right? Because I think they prove the fact that the pineal gland has.
Yes, the brain does produce DMT. At least we know all the enzymes to synthesize DMT are in the brain, and actually other parts of the body as well. The lungs, especially, the lungs seem to be an area where the most of the DMT synthesis in the body goes on, and the DMT is taken into the brain by active transport, this is also a very unusual thing, that it is actually actively transported into the brain, and we know that the pineal gland does have DMT in it, and we certainly know that it has all the enzymes for making, it has all the precursors for DMT, it has all the enzymes to make it. What the role of it is, if it actually does have an important role physiologically, it's not so clear what that might be. But it definitely is there, and maybe, and generally nature does not, nature doesn't waste time, it doesn't waste resources. If it's there, it has to have a function. We just haven't quite figured out what that function is. But there is a lot of speculation right now, a lot of interest in trying to figure out what that might be, what that function is. And we found that endogenous DMT, other people have found, I haven't found, other people have found that endogenous DMT does interact with these sigma receptors in the body, not serotonin receptors, but sigma receptors. And it may regulate a number of processes via that mechanism, kind of an immunoregulator. So it's, the functions of DMT are being figured out. Smarter people than me are trying to figure out what this is. And there's a researcher in Budapest right now named E.D. Frexa. And he's come up with a very interesting idea, which is that DMT is neuroprotective, and that when one is having a heart attack or a stroke, what you die from in those situations is usually the brain doesn't have enough oxygen, right? So the term is hypoxia. You die from oxygen deprivation, essentially, in these crisis situations. So he has actually suggested that, every crash cart in every emergency room in the world should have vials of DMT, preloaded, able, so that when people come in and they face that crisis of dying from a heart attack or a stroke, they can be given DMT on an emergency basis. And that will buy about 20 to 30 minutes of time where the brain is protected from hypoxic damage.
Wow.
So pretty wild idea, but actually completely, I don't know. It's hard to see the FDA or anybody else approving this use of DMT, but the science is solid. It's a completely reasonable speculation that that might be one of the main functions of endogenous DMT.
Is it true that when you die, or if somebody has a near-death experience, your body releases DMT?
Well, again, this is, and exactly related to this speculation. So that may be what happens, right? When you're on the cusp of death, when you are dying, your brain senses that it's dying because it doesn't have enough oxygen, and that triggers feedback mechanisms, feedback loops, so that the lungs start massively pumping out DMT. That is transported into the brain, by this active transport mechanism. So it's a reasonable idea. It is definitively proved, no, but it could be investigated.
Now, could that have a direct? You hear a lot of people who have near-death experiences, and they say that they saw loved ones, or they said that they went to heaven and came back. Do you think that there's any link between your body's release of DMT and maybe, seeing things and having these during these near-death experiences?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think it's very much about the release of these tryptamines. Now, I mean, one of the things that goes on in the near-death experience is, not that I've ever been there, or hopefully I won't be until my day comes, but excuse me, one of the things that go on is you really don't have any sense of time, right? You don't know how long this is lasting. And what you experience as being, hours or even days, there are reports, may actually be just a few minutes, as the brain is essentially shutting down, its neurochemistry is going completely off track. It's dying of oxygen deprivation. All sorts of things are going on, and it's a very high stress situation. And the DMT is being released, partly to, according to this speculation, it's being released as a neuroprotective compound. It's a very strong antioxidant. It's protecting the brain from. It's protecting it from. Just a minute. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. That's a nice thing about not being live.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get back to it. We were going to Zoom, but I realized I didn't send out a Zoom connection to you quick enough. So,
well, it was honestly, I've never used it, and I was actually quite curious about it, but I didn't have the time to. Because what I do is I have a piece of software that actually records our Skype conversation, and then on YouTube I put a video version of the episode on there, so people can get the podcast like they can get any podcast on a phone app or iTunes or wherever. But if people would like to actually visually see us, if any guest calls in using video, then I post it on our YouTube channel where people can visually see us. But I have this program that will actually record your video side and my video side of the conversation, and then put them side by side. And then I was looking, I didn't have enough time to do enough research, but I was going to look for a piece of software that did the same thing with Zoom. I've never used Zoom, but apparently you said you have a lot of luck with it, right?
I have good luck with it, yeah, and it's got recording built in, right? So,
oh really?
You can, yeah, you've got recording. You can do that. You can have, multiple people on without any loss of bandwidth or.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, you can have 50 people on a call. It's basically like GoToMeeting or some of these things, but a lot cheaper and a lot more versatile as far as I can tell. So we can test it out sometime. I'm sorry, I fell down. I didn't get it to you in time. But
oh, it's okay.
It's great software, and it does give you the capability to record, which I like. I like that.
Yeah, same here, because there's been times where, I've had one time I was this historian Thaddeus Russell. I worked a year to get him on the show. Then our schedules collided. Then for some reason I wasn't hearing back, and then finally get him on. we do the whole show and I forget to hit record on the software.
Oh my God!
So the only thing that saved me was the fact that I had the software that recorded my Skype conversation, which the quality wasn't quite as good, but it still worked. And and I'm like, oh, thank God I have something, because we just talked for 2 hours, and basically it just vanished into the air. Broke my heart. So I was glad that I at least had the software. But yeah, if that does that, that's awesome. I've never heard of it, but it's definitely. I'm always happy to get recommendations for software and new products and stuff like that. And if you have luck with it, then I'll definitely check it out, because I'm always looking for new stuff.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can have multiple people, that's awesome.
I'd be happy to do a test run with you.
Yeah, we'll do that sometime.
Just to demonstrate it. I mean, it's too late now. We're into this, but after this is formally done, or another time, we can test it out. You can see for yourself.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on, and we can try that the Zoom instead of Skype, because I definitely know of a lot of people who have bad luck with Skype. I've had guests on for some reason, we just can't get a clear connection, or we end up having to do only audio because the video isn't the bandwidth strength isn't apparently strong enough. So. If you have another reliable one, then that's awesome. I'll definitely check that out. But to get back to the DMT, you were also in the documentary called DMT, a Spirit Molecule, which that one and Neurons to Nirvana are both on Netflix at the moment. So if you guys are listening, please check them out. They're very interesting. And somebody like myself, who, it's funny because people like yourself and your brother Terence McKenna and Joe Rogan and London Real and Christopher Ryan, all these people who are really sparking this interest in psychedelics. And as an adult, I smoked weed when I was younger, and I was a musician, so I was around a lot of friends that messed around with doing mushrooms and playing music and all that stuff. But for some reason, I never really got too experimental with that. I think probably because I've had some friends that were close to overdosing or had overdoses, so it kind of scared me off a little bit. And then the combination of that, and then being a kid and the propaganda you're sold about how dangerous this stuff is, you really don't mess around with it much. And as I became an adult, I've become much more curious, not so much with the just trying to see shit, but and trying to hallucinate, but more because of the idea of expanding consciousness. Because one thing I've always loved was, when you're in this routine of, you obviously are a very busy person, and you go on your retreats to Peru and stuff like that. So you're not in this routine, but the average person is very much in this routine of going to work, coming home, taking care of their priorities, their chores, and then sleeping. And you're in this routine, and then it seems like your brain's creativity or imagination kind of lacks a little bit. But once you travel, or I've even had nights where I drank. I was out with a couple of friends. I had a couple of friends over last night. We're smoking cigars and drinking whiskey, and just that alone, just something that takes me out of my routine, that makes me my brain process act or react a little differently. It's amazing how different you see things. And I've even done it the next day when I'm hungover. Just because I'm hungover, I'm looking at things a little differently. And that's the part that was intriguing to me, is this idea that we don't realize until we travel or we get out of our routine how stuck in this or machine-like we become. And then when you do something like mushrooms or ecstasy or LSD or DMT, then you see things completely different. And I think I've talked about this with I've had a lot of guests on my show that have experimented with stuff, and being a musician, and I've had comedians on, and a lot of interesting comedians have messed around with psychedelics, and Hunter S. Thompson, and so there's been tons of people throughout history, Bill Hicks, who have messed around with these things and really seem to be some of the most interesting people. And I think that's the message that I think people have to kind of keep track of, because really alcohol kills thousands and thousands of people every year. Tobacco does, but yet LSD is a Schedule I substance, and it's like, and it shows you how hard it is to change somebody's perspective. Because I have a son, and I just talked about this on the last podcast, how you have a child and they're born with a clean slate. Like, they have no understanding on right from wrong, and you can kind of mold them. I mean, everything that they understand of the world is based on what we feed them for information, what they see, what they hear. So you grow up thinking this is normal, and this is right, this is wrong. And that's what happened with marijuana. That's what happened with a lot of different things. I've gotten in arguments with people where they're like, oh, no, alcohol is not as bad for you as marijuana. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, there's no, and never mind the fact that if you just look at the medical benefits, hemp oil, with Rick Simpson and his research into hemp oil, and I think Jimmy Carter, the ex-president of the United States of America, he cured himself with hemp oil, and there's tons of cases of it. And yet, I have a mother-in-law who just died of cancer. And when I brought up hemp oil to the family, like, hey, maybe we should attempt this, they looked at me like I was a little bit crazy. And I'm just like, there's no side effects. There's no reason not to attempt it. And it seems like there's this, we've been, I guess for lack of a better term, brainwashed into believing that this is, modern medicine is synthetic. It's surgery, it's chemo, radiation, it's all these things, and anything outside of that is pseudoscience and doesn't work. And if it did work, we would know about it. But what's amazing is how much research is out there on these other things. I mean, you look at, I don't know if you know the Australian doctor Sam Chichoa, who, is cured, claims that he cured Charlie Sheen of AIDS, and actually to prove that he did, he took Charlie Sheen's blood and shot it into himself. And pretty insane. But I've had Dr. Brzezinski on, who's been curing cancer, had a treatment with anti-neoplastone since the early 90s, I believe, and been curing people of cancer, had success, and his information has been suppressed. Suzanne Summers, who wrote the book Knockout, she cured herself of breast cancer without chemo and radiation, and was amazed by how many alternative doctors and medicines there are out there that nobody informed her of. And this stuff drives me fucking crazy, because the fact that, we have natural remedies or natural plants or herbs and things that we considered medicine for centuries and centuries, now we look at as it's not. And the fact that these things aren't even an alternative, they're not even something that is suggested, drives me crazy, because worst case scenario, it doesn't work. Then you go to modern medicine, or what we call modern medicine, and synthetic medicine and that type of stuff. But the fact that there's kids who are having seizures, or cancer patients who can't get cannabis to help improve their everyday life, and they have to wake up in pain or suffering every day just because of this old caveman law that or propaganda that marijuana is bad for you, drives me fucking crazy. And I don't know if there's any question in this long rant of mine, but as you can see, I'm very passionate about this stuff just as much as you are. And so I guess do you want to expand on that?
I mean, I think you bring up some very good points, which is for one thing, the propaganda machine is very effective, and it's been able to sort of, create this impression among the mainstream about alternative medicine, and psychedelics is certainly part of that. But this, there's this relentless propaganda machine that really does suppress real information, that deliberately puts out disinformation about many of these things. There's quite a body of scientific knowledge, actual clinical studies on herbal medicines of all kinds, and if you look at PubMed, which is the National Library of Medicine database, if you search if you search medicinal plants, in PubMed, which is available to anybody, your tax dollars pay for this wonderful service, which is the biomedical database of the National Library of Medicine. If you put in medicinal plants and clinical trials, if you click, that check mark and run that, you will see there are thousands of clinical studies on medicinal plants of all kinds for all kinds of, all kinds of conditions. So it's information wars and information suppression, and and this has been applied to psychedelics forever. And I think there are a number of lessons you can take for this, which is one thing. Politicians should not be empowered to make decisions regarding medicine or any scientific topic because they're idiots. And, these are people who deny science. I mean, not only do they deny it, I mean, obviously with climate change is the obvious one, but not only do they deny it, they're proud that they deny it. I mean, they are out front of, yes, we don't believe any of those scientific lies. These pointy-headed scientists are, evil people. Well, this is just madness, and this is sort of the, it becomes very discouraging because as a culture we seem to be very interested in abandoning reason and science and evidence and this sort of thing, and I don't, this dismays me, because I'm not a person who says science knows everything. I'm a person who's famous for saying science knows very little, but what we know is solid, and as far as a method for asking questions of nature and getting answers back that you can verify, science is very powerful. We shouldn't worship science. It's not about that. It's simply a tool, and it's a very useful tool. And in the climate that we have, the sort of cultural climate where reasonableness is denounced, reason is denounced, science is denounced. It's a crazy situation out there, and it's unfortunate because, it's unfortunate on a number of levels. But as you say, like medicine, what we consider conventional medicine is largely, in some ways, a joke. Because many of the procedures are not effective. And many procedures, like with natural medicines to treat cancer and this sort of thing, may be effective, but they're getting no attention. They're getting no respect. And I'm the last one to say that just because a medicine is natural or plant-derived, it's going to work. I think it has to come up to the same standards as anything does. But many of the approved medicines for treating cancers don't work either. And I think where you find this particularly, sort of disturbing and also a good example of what's going on is in psychiatric medicine, where we have all kinds of, psychopharmaceuticals. We've got antidepressants, we've got antipsychotics, we've got, all of these things, stimulants and so on, which people are being encouraged to take, and they are not effective, and they are, antidepressants by and large don't work. If you look at the literature, the effect is either not there at all or very small compared to placebo. And yet here we have the psychedelics, which are totally suppressed, which actually can help people get to the root of their problems, examine their issues that are making them depressed or anxious or whatever they're, traumatized or whatever, and really work through that. Psychedelics themselves don't do it. They're adjuncts to, psychotherapeutic situations, but they can be very powerful in that respect. Many people who have been through years of psychotherapy, will go to South America or wherever and take ayahuasca a few times and come back saying basically, 3 sessions of ayahuasca was worth 10 years of therapy. So how can we ignore these things? And not only ignore them, but how can we suppress them? I don't get it. It's disturbing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a little bit does have to, you look at the 60s when everybody was experimenting. What happened? Everybody was anti-war. They couldn't be sold this bullshit. They couldn't be sold the nonsense because they saw through it and they're like, no, we're all one. We all, I guess it sounds very hippie of me of saying, oh yeah, we're all one and we all love each other. But we kind of are all one. we're made up of chemicals. Well, when we die, we disintegrate. The rest of our body decomposes into the earth and eventually gets recycled into something else. And we're all just a part of nature. And I think there is something. I mean, anybody who's ever been outside, if there's young people listening to this, they probably haven't been outside in the woods. But if people my age or older, they who they played outside, they played in the woods, there's something. There's this connection. There's something about being outside near nature and animals, and like I said before, I love smoking cigars, and my favorite place to smoke cigars is anywhere where I'm near nature. It's relaxing. It's like hearing the animals, and there's something, and there's a connection there that you can't really put into words, but there's something there. You realize that they're not two separate things, and like you were saying too, like the fact that these drugs have to be, I mean, they basically, the DSM, I mean, I have a huge issue with the DSM. I mean, this whole idea of people go on a pill for a chemical imbalance, but there's no way of actually knowing which chemical is in balance and how much they need to give you, so how imbalanced it is. So they'll just give you a pill and you become a guinea pig. It's like, well, if this doesn't work, we'll try this. Or if this dosage doesn't work, we'll try a higher dosage. And they just keep experimenting with shit. And what they don't actually tell you, too, is the fact that most of these things just suppress all emotions, not just the one that you're trying to avoid, which is depression. So they have huge, I mean, you look at SSRIs, the fact that like all these mass shooters, a lot of them were on SSRIs, if not all of them, and I think a little bit probably has to do with the fact that when you lack of motion, you also lack empathy and your ability to to feel bad for what you're doing. So I mean, there's all that, and the thing is too is there's such a connection between mind, body, and how we feel mentally. And I know that people have used MDMA, and I believe the Heffter Institute, you guys, research a lot of this stuff. And MDMA, which is basically, for people listening, is ecstasy. And they use it for PTSD. They use it for all these things. And really, it's amazing how people don't look at that like as it would work. People think that the only thing that will work is something synthetically made, which most of the time is only not getting to the root cause of the issue in the first place. The problem with modern medicine is we just try to suppress the symptom. So if my knees hurt, we just stop the pain. We don't actually get to the root cause of what's causing my knees to hurt. Is it lack of cartilage? Is it because I'm overweight? We just keep giving you painkillers and to make the pain go away. And we're just putting a Band-Aid on the issue instead of getting to the root cause of the issue. And that's another issue with modern medicine. But I mean, I remember hearing a study about people who were recovering in hospitals, who were outside on woods and a nice scenery compared to just seeing more hospital, and people consistently healed quicker, when they had a nice scenery. And I guess probably being in a hospital atmosphere is depressing and kind of mentally can affect you. And so I think there's a lot of research in that's not being done. This whole idea of the placebo effect. I mean, I remember reading about the knee surgery, the fact that they cut people open, but they didn't actually give them knee surgery, but they all felt better, and so it's just there's so much that we still don't understand. But the problem is, like you guys talked about in Neurons to Nirvana, they end up making MDMA a Schedule 1, which basically means it has no medical benefits, and so you guys lack an ability to get these drugs, to even research them, right? Because for people who are listening and don't know what the Heffter Institute is, what is it? I mean, it's similar to MAPS, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, Heffter is also a nonprofit organization, Heffter.org, Heffter, and we're like MAPS, we're a nonprofit organization, and we're more scientifically oriented, perhaps. Most of the people involved in the sort of cutting edge of science research on psychedelics are either already on our board or they're being supported by us. And so we're less political than MAPS. We're more scientifically oriented. But on the other hand, now we're reaching a point where we've sort of staked out psilocybin as our focus, and now that we're reaching a point where we need to sort of engage with the regulatory process so that this stuff can be gotten out to a wider range of patients, we, like it or not, we have to also deal with the regulatory issues, which amounts to finding a way to approve it for medical uses, because that's That's the main thing about Schedule 1. Schedule 1 means it has no medical application whatsoever. It's highly dangerous. It's highly subject to abuse. And, that's what defines it as Schedule 1. And we already know, there's plenty of evidence that shows that there's no justification for MDMA or psilocybin or cannabis to be in Schedule 1 because they have medical uses, and there's an abundance of evidence to support that. But, you, in your rant there, you
one of many.
One of many, and that's good that you're a ranter, but you put your finger on a number of important things, I think, when you said that, which is this idea that medicine, as we were discussing before, medicine is a joke in some ways, and especially in psychiatry, because it does it over relies on the chemical fix, right? The idea of a pill for every ill, and you're feeling a little bad, maybe you're a little depressed. Well, we have a pill for that. Oh, well, you're anxious. We have a pill for that. You're too excited. We have a pill for that. You're not excited enough. We have a pill for that. And this whole DSM thing is just absurd, it's like it's almost as though the psychopharmaceutical industry comes up with a new substance, and it does this and that in the body and based on human, and then they almost have to invent a disorder that it can be prescribed for. So no, that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Well, you have off-label use, right? Off-label use.
Well, off-label use. Yeah. Off-label use. But off-label use is okay, but it has to make sense. And, so the fact that we look at these systems, we look at medicine, we look at people, essentially as machines, right? We're complex machines. If you apply just the right molecular monkey wrench in the right place, you can fix the machine, right? But people are not machines. And we're complex, we're biochemical systems, but what's been exorcised out of medicine, and I think has made it, has impoverished it in some way, and is also the reason why there's so much resistance to reintegrating psychedelics into medicine. What's been exercised out of medicine is the idea of spirit, right? And the idea that there is a spiritual aspect to healing. There's a spiritual aspect of medicine. Psychedelics are medicines for the spirit, right? Essentially, they treat diseases of the spirit. Medicine, biomedicine, doesn't even acknowledge that the spirit exists, So this is the problem, that, you have these things that can actually help people, in a spiritual way, but medicine doesn't acknowledge that as an important component of healing. That's beginning to change slowly. My employer here in Minnesota, I teach courses for, the Center for Spirituality and Healing, which is the alternative medicine program at the University of Minnesota. And when that outfit was founded 20 years ago now, it was extremely controversial that they would include the word spirituality in their title. The woman that founded, a very visionary person, got a lot of pushback about that. It's like, do you really want to call this the Center for Spirituality and Healing? And she bravely said, well, yes, because you cannot separate spirituality from healing. And that's where these psychedelic medicines are so important.
Yeah, that's the thing. People don't realize how many benefits, or how many possible benefits you could get out of MDMA, and so for the average listener, if you guys obviously there is restrictions on. I mean, okay, because I think my initial question, I'm not sure if you answered or not, or if I even asked it. I remember thinking about asking it, but
Yeah.
are you guys having a hard time getting these drugs to do research on and to study it? Is that because it's substance or Schedule 1? And is there, and then with that said, also, what type of benefits do you think these drugs could possibly have to people? Like I brought up PTSD, but I've also heard about alcoholism and addictions to alcohol and stuff like that. So there is many type of different benefits that could possibly come out of these natural medicines.
Yes, there are many potential benefits. We don't really have a problem getting access to these drugs to do research on because we jump through all the hoops, right? In other words, we work with established investigators in established institutions like Johns Hopkins and New York University and UCLA. So we're very conventional, and we comply with all the regs in that respect. And we go through the hoops. We fill out the paperwork to do these studies, right? The FDA approves them. We publish the results. The big hurdle comes when you want to be able to say, well, we've shown that MDMA, for example, is effective for treating PTSD. We have the data to show this. We have published studies that show this. So FDA, how about approving this for people to use, therapists to use to treat PTSD? Getting to that stage, you have to go through this draconian drug approval process. You have to go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And phase 1 is basically safety. It doesn't even look at the condition. It just looks, can the drug be given safely? And then if it can, then you go to phase 2, where you have a small group of people with a condition like PTSD, and you do a double-blind clinical study with them. You collect that information. You say, well, it does appear to help. 85% of the people in this study cohort saw their symptoms relieved. Then you have to go to phase 3. And that's where the real money and expense comes in, because then you have to say, well, we need to have a multi-center study, several thousand patients, and obviously then you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, and that's just the way the drug development process works. So when you're looking at a drug like MDMA or psilocybin, which there's no revenue model. These things are not patented. They can't be patented.
And that's probably why there's not as much research into this stuff too, right?
And part of that is why, there's not as much research, because they're patented. And the other thing is, drug companies want you to take drugs you take 4 times a day for the rest of your life. These you take maybe twice in your lifetime. So, some people take them more, obviously, but the use is infrequent because they're done in conjunction with psychotherapy. So there's no revenue model in that for the drug companies, and so they're less interested in it. And so then it's left to nonprofits like MAPS and Heffter to try to bring these forth and get approval to use in clinical situations. We don't have that kind of money, in order to do it, we have to try to raise that kind of money, and MAPS is working on that, and so is Heffter to a certain extent. So eventually, I think, if you saw Neurons to Nirvana, that there is no revenue model, there's no incentive for the pharmaceutical industry to develop psychedelics, even though it would have tremendous benefits in psychiatric medicine. I think, I think the revenue model for these things is that once they're approved, obviously the way to do these is to establish centers, places, essentially clinics, places people could go to get these treatments. And the centers, that's where the revenue model, the centers would not look like clinics or hospital. They would look like spas, more like a place you go to have this experience, maybe even have, family therapy sessions and that sort of thing. I think that's where the revenue for the use of these things comes in. But right now, that can't happen under the regulatory framework that exists in the state. I mean, it's happening other places. It's happening in South America very much with ayahuasca. And that model is sort of something that could be transplanted to the States. Probably it's going to be a long time before ayahuasca gets approved, for anything in the States for a variety of reasons. But
it's becoming a much more common thing. I mean, I can bring up DMT in a conversation, and now you actually get a couple people who know what it is, where maybe 20 years ago people would be like, what the fuck is DMT, and so I think where it's coming along, and I think people I think we're definitely in the middle of a transition. I think people are looking for, I think medicine has, it's like that guy that what do they call him, the pharma bro guy, the guy who raised the price of a pharmaceutical drug some ridiculous amount, and I think people are starting to lose trust in pharmaceutical companies and realize that they're a for-profit corporation. And I'll get in conversations with people, and people will be like, yeah, but vitamins don't have to go through the same type of a testing that pharmaceutical companies do. And I'm like, yeah, but that's because it's extracted from food. And does food have to be tested? I'm like, they have. It's not the same thing. I'm like, it's because it's in a pill. We have this idea, and not all vitamins are equal. I mean, you have better quality stuff, and you have synthetic vitamins, which I don't recommend. But it's still extracted from food. But because it's in a pill, people assume it's not natural. It's not coming from herbs or plants or whatever. And when they don't realize that even things that are FDA approved, so you won't take a vitamin because it doesn't have to be FDA approved, but you have drugs that are FDA approved, and then a year later you're watching TV at 2 a.m. and some attorney's office is saying, do you have a friend who died from this drug, right. In the last year, or had a stroke or whatever? You might be owed some money. And then I'm like, I always tell people, I'm like, that's the most obvious example that even the FDA approval can be nonsense and bullshit, and doesn't mean it's safe. Because if it was,
right.
If it did have to go through some extensive, testing and researching to get it FDA approved, then why would anything after 6 months or a year be taken off the market because of deaths? And I mean, we become guinea pigs. And I think there's a revolving door between big pharma and FDA, and you can see people who worked for the FDA, who now work for companies like Pfizer and Merck and vice versa, and a lot of them are in bed together. And I think that, it sucks. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Well, you're right. Again, I mean, the whole approval process is rigged in a certain sense because of this too close relationship between Big Pharma and the FDA. And you're right. Many drugs that go through that rigorous billion-dollar FDA process, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are released out to the market, and then a year later turn out, well, there is a side effect that we didn't anticipate or we didn't screen for or whatever, and it's got to be taken off the market. And people say, and so yes, this process does not, it often fails. I mean, we understand that these things have to be safe, but this process designed to ensure safety often fails. And then when you come to the dietary supplements and the natural medicines, I mean, I think we have a schizophrenic, sort of cognitive dissonance regarding these natural medicines, right? Because we want natural medicines, we want plant-derived medicines, but we want them to look like pharmaceuticals, right? We want them in a capsule, we want them in a bubble pack, we want them with we want them to look like pharmaceuticals. And if you give somebody a tea or a tincture, I mean, some will accept it, but some will be very suspicious about it. Well, how can this tea be effective, or how can this tincture be effective? I want a pill, man, and that's just what we've been educated to expect. I think a point worth making here that people have misunderstanding sometimes about the regulatory situation with regard to dietary supplements and natural medicines. There is a framework. The FDA does have some control over these things. People will say, well, they're unregulated. Actually, they're not unregulated. There's the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, which is the framework for these natural supplements and vitamins and botanicals, which are just lumped in as a huge category. If there's something on the market that is clearly harmful, the FDA has the authority to order that it be taken off the market. What they don't have is the authority to prevent it being brought to the market before its safety and efficacy has been demonstrated. And people are free to put things on the market. That's the way DSHEA works. If they're safe, then great, they can stay on the market. They do not have to prove that they work, but then for approved pharmaceuticals, they often don't have to prove that they actually work. If you look at like the plethora of studies with antidepressants and so on, many of them show that they really have they're not better than placebo. Yet those drugs get approved because drug companies have the resources to do numerous clinical studies, right? Maybe 8 out of 10 fail, but they have 2 where the outcome was good. So based on that, they can apply for approval. So it is definitely a game system in a lot of ways, very imperfect, and there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah, and even the war on drugs, I mean, the money that we spend locking people up, putting them in prisons for nonviolent offenses, and Portugal, which I was born in Portugal, and that country, a lot of people don't realize, but they decriminalized all drugs, and it's actually been quite a success. And I mean, obviously, it's very different than America because it's a much smaller country, so it's a much smaller scale, but it shows that if somebody is willing to attempt to do this, that it actually makes sense. If you, because the thing is that we have this idea that if we just say that everything's legal, then people are just going to go out and do drugs every day. And it's just ridiculous. It's like, I'm not going to do heroin if it's legal or not legal. But guess what? If it's legal or not legal, I could probably still get it. So it doesn't affect the availability of it. All you're doing is affecting the fact that I'm either getting it from a place that has some regulation to give me the substance I'm asking for, or going down to Springfield and getting it from a drug dealer who knows what he laced it with or adding or what I'm getting. So it's
right.
That's what they're doing. They're making it unsafe. In Massachusetts, we've had this. I'm sure you're probably aware of it, but this incredible epidemic of heroin overdoses, which came from. And I've had 2 friends in the last 6 months that died of heroin overdoses, and it's absolutely insane. And a lot of this came from, if not most of it, came from the addiction to pharmaceuticals. A lot of these kids were on painkillers, they're on Oxycontins, they're on Percocets, and then once finally they got tougher on giving that out. And Mariana Van Zeller, who did the documentary Oxycontin Express, she was actually on my show, and that documentary was a big part of changing regulation because it exposed how ridiculous it was, how easy it was to get Oxycontins in Florida, and how they're writing more prescriptions than the rest of the country. And so these people were on painkillers and now on heroin, and now they're on the street trying to get a fix for the painkiller that they can't get anymore, and they're getting something that they don't know what they're getting, and they're overdosing because they don't know the strength of it, they don't know what's in it, and it's insane. And even people like Carl Hart, Dr. Carl Hart, who's really changed my opinion on what addiction is in general, because you get people who are like, yeah, but they're junkies, or they're this, they're addicts, and it's just like, well, what is addiction, And I remember I believe it was Carl Hart who talked about the experiment about mice that they put, I don't know if it was heroin or cocaine or whatever in the water, and it kept coming to get more and kept coming to get more, but they didn't realize that like the cage was a part of the experiment. Now you put it in its natural habitat where it can run around, it doesn't come to the water. So
yes, I've read this. I've read about this. This is exactly right. Yeah. So it just shows you what an artificial and unreal world kind of thing that study is, right? But I mean, again, you're great to talk to because you bring up all these things. We could do podcasts on every one of these topics, but we're definitely resonating here. But it's don't get me started on the war on drugs and how ineffective that is. And I think that, it's obviously a joke. It's not working. Even politicians are beginning to wake up to the fact that this is not effective. The reason for that it's not effective, in my opinion, is that in the first place, the focus should not be on the drugs. Because for every drug that you prohibit, there's going to be another one that comes along. I mean, there are people in labs synthesizing all these so-called research chemicals all the time. And so you cannot solve the war on drugs or the drug problem by prohibiting substances. What you have to do is focusing on education. You have to teach people to be informed about what substances they use, and if they choose to use substances, how to use those in a way that minimizes any harm, and if there's benefit, maximizes any benefit. I mean, so the emphasis needs to shift from prohibition to, because we know that doesn't work, that only creates black markets, to education. And what the drug educational industry, cannot wrap their heads around is that in order for that to be effective, they have to teach people how to use drugs. And this is anathema to their whole mission, right? I mean, we're here to teach people not to use drugs, to stay away from drugs. Well, it doesn't work. People have an inherent desire to alter consciousness. This is built into the chemistry of our complex brain. So if we're going to alter consciousness, there are ways to do it that are safer and more effective and may involve drugs. But you can make conscious choices about how and which drugs to do and what is appropriate use, right? What is appropriate use? No guidelines are provided to any of this in drug education. The entire message is don't do it, don't use drugs. But ironically, I taught a course once called Culture, Drugs, and Society. Most of my students were 20-something young people. So the first day, we went around the class. So you're in this course, Culture, Drugs, and Society. Why are you registered for this course? What led you to sign up? They almost all said, well, I've been interested in drugs ever since I took that DARE course. In the 6th grade, I got curious about drugs, and that's what got me started. So the very course that was supposed to keep them away from drugs actually got them curious about drugs. And that's not working. That's crazy. Another interesting thing, and then I'll shut up. But another. I'm
interviewing you, so you're the one who should be doing the talking, not me.
Well, another interesting thing I did want to bring up that sort of ties into this whole dietary supplement thing.
Yeah.
That's relevant is the heroin epidemic, which really springs out of the OxyContin abuse. People can't get OxyContin, and so they turn to heroin because it's cheap, it's easily available, and that's what they do. What's rarely talked about in this conversation, because people have to be informed to know about it, but there is this dietary supplement called kratom, which you may have heard of, this plant from Southeast Asia, that it is an opiate. There's no doubt it has opiate-like effects, but it does not cause a death because it doesn't cause respiratory failure like narcotics do, like heroin does. Many people who want to get off OxyContin, and if they're hip and informed, they turn to kratom, which is actually a reasonable thing to do. It's a substitute for opiates. It is, in fact, an opiate itself. So, yeah, it causes addiction, not as strong as heroin, but it's inherently less toxic. And what's ironic and sort of discouraging is that the FDA is right now becoming, basically very active to try to suppress kratom. It's still legal, it's still available, but not for long. And, instead of someone informed saying maybe kratom is a solution, to some of these heroin overdose that are happening, people should be, if they can't get off drugs, they should be encouraged to take kratom instead of heroin. There should be educational programs that teach people about this thing, but that's not happening. So
wasn't LSD created for the purpose of psychologists to be able to kind of see things from the perspective of somebody who was, I guess, insane? Or
well, that was one of the earliest uses. LSD was created essentially by accident. Albert Hoffman was working on a whole series, he's a chemist working for Sandoz. He was working on a whole series of ergot derivatives, alkaloids from the ergot fungus, some of which are good treatments for migraines and good circulatory stimulants and so on. He was looking for substances that were better treatments for migraines. And he accidentally, and LSD was in that series, one of those in the series. He synthesized it in 1938 initially, gave it to the animal pharmacology department. They tested it on a few animals. It seemed like, well, there's nothing interesting here. All they do is sit there. We don't, there's nothing going on. And so he more or less put it on the shelf for 5 years. And then for some reason, intuition, he decided to take another look at that compound. And being a good Swiss chemist, he didn't use the 5-year-old sample. He synthesized a new batch. And the story goes that somehow in that process he got exposed to it, tiny amount, and he had the first LSD trip in history. And then he went back the next day and deliberately tested, what he thought would be the tiniest possible dose. It couldn't possibly be active, which was 1/4 milligram, which we now know was actually a huge dose of LSD, or a very solid dose of LSD. And then he saw what the full effect was. And then it began, and as the company accepted it and said, well, you got this remarkable compound here. What is it good for? And they began to share it with clinicians around the world, basically with the pitch that, it does resemble, mental illness. If you want to get an inside look at mental illness, or schizophrenia specifically, maybe this drug will give you a model psychosis. That was the term. It produces a model psychosis. And so that was the earliest clinical use of LSD. And then as time went on, and before it was made illegal, other therapeutic uses emerged.
Well, and the CIA used it. I mean, they used it with the
CIA. Yeah, they were all over this stuff early on, and their motives were not so. Their motives were fairly sinister. I mean, they were interested in mind control essentially, and brainwashing and so on. I guess, well, that's okay. That was their job. LSD did not work very well, by the way, for that. or for for incapacitating people in warfare. I mean, it certainly did that, but I mean, there's a great YouTube clip that you've probably seen where this group of soldiers out in the field, they take LSD, and they completely, discipline falls apart, to say the least. So there is that. And as you pointed out at the top of this conversation, LSD had to be suppressed in the late 60s because it did make people question things. It made people question authority, and it made people, as my brother liked to say, it made people have funny ideas, which are inherently dangerous. Funny ideas like, maybe I don't need to go to Vietnam and kill people I've never met. Maybe I don't need to work in some cubicle all my life so that at the end of the day they can take my pension away and toss me on the street. Maybe I don't need to do all these things that are expected of us if we're going to be, happy, cheerful consumers, producers. There's more to life than that.
That's exactly what that clip that I sampled for you to put in, that I put in my song too, was you talking about, becoming producers, consumers, and how it prevents us from falling into their agenda. And it's I think that's a very interesting point, because I think we do become machines. We become machines in this cycle of marketing telling us that happiness comes from buying shit that we don't really need. Now we created this, we create this debt early. I mean, you get kids, that don't even have liquid funds, don't even have a job, and already have pre-approved credit cards. You go to college, and then you come out, you're already in debt. So what I think debt does is that in a real, quickly into your adult life, you're already stuck into the system. You're stuck into the machine. You have very little flexibility because you have this debt, which you have to pay off, which means you have to probably work a job that you dislike. But even if you dislike it, you don't really have any room that's flexible to go look for a job that pays less, or a job that, or even look for a job and quit this one, because you're stuck in this hole. And you start off in a negative right in the beginning of your adult life, and it just makes us these machines where we don't have time or money to experiment with things and travel. And I know that you went to Peru. I think one of the times we're going to schedule this show, you were going to Peru. And what happened there? Was it a retreat? Did you go to experiment with some stuff, or did you go to research? Or
Well, no, I go to Peru a lot. I've been working in Peru off and on really for 30 years, because I went there as a graduate student in 1981 the first time. I did, my doctoral research and all that was about ayahuasca mostly, and some of these other hallucinogens. So that's my early Peru connection. Lately, I've just been going down there because I organize ayahuasca retreats down there, and I found a place to work with and a curandero to work with that I really enjoy, and so that gets me down there, once or twice a year, which is really nice. I've had research going on in Peru also. I had got a grant, a few years ago now, but a grant from a private foundation to look into Amazonian plants to treat dementias, essentially, and cognitive deficits. So that grant was great. We didn't find the cure for senile dementia. I didn't really expect to. But what was good for me is it let me reconnect with a lot of people I worked with back in the day when I was a graduate student. So now all those connections are active and alive, and because I'm doing these retreats, I get a chance to go down there quite often, and that's great for me. And people come down and they have life transforming experiences that are really, really good to see, because that's the thing. Again, as you said, this is one of the big virtues, I guess you could say, of psychedelics. They let you step temporarily outside this reference frame, outside this box that we all create for ourselves: job, debt, consumerism, and normal waking day-to-day life that in some ways it can be enjoyable, but in some ways it's a trap because people are not able to step outside of their box and look at it and reevaluate their life and think, well, is this really where I want to be? What different direction could I be going? Psychedelics are catalysts for this, that they give you the chance to do this. And this is why they are dangerous. Yeah, you damn right they're dangerous. I mean, the people that suppress them, they know very well. They're not dangerous because they're toxic or because they'll drive you crazy. They're dangerous because they make people ask questions. And that is not appreciated, by totalitarian institutions. Your job is not to ask questions. Your job is to work, consume, and pretty much sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And you dealing with these type of chemicals and these type of things. I mean, there is some sense of dogma in science where people are very you get the atheistic and I'm an atheist myself, but you get the extreme atheists who are everything has to be scientific. The Richard Dawkins, I even had Cara Santa Maria on, who is a scientist, and I remember asking her once, do you think that there's any great discovery, anything that we still don't understand? Are we going to look back in history and say we're dumbasses the same way we look at 200 years ago the way they looked at the world? And she's like, no, she thinks that almost every great discovery has happened, and there's going to be more discoveries, but there's going to be nothing that's going to change our whole perspective on things. Nothing. And I tend to disagree because like you've talked about in other interviews, I mean, what is reality? It's all, we have these, I mean, explain smell to somebody who doesn't have a nose. I mean, there's things we can only see and hear.
No, I totally disagree with what this woman is saying. I guess it's a woman. I don't know who it is, but Richard Dawkins the same way. These are people who haven't, well, for one thing, they have never looked within themselves. I bet Richard Dawkins has never taken a psychedelic. I'd be willing to bet that this woman has never taken a psychedelic.
Well, I think with her, she came from a very religious family, and I love Cara. She's super nice, but I definitely disagree with her when it comes down to this, because I think the problem with her, like you said, is the common problem with a lot of these. They go from she came from a very religious family who was based on, mostly their opinions were based on faith and not science, and then she realized that a lot of what they were saying was bullshit, and then she went to the other extreme. But she doesn't realize that in some sense her views are just as extreme as probably her parents that she was disapproving of as an adult. So I think that it gets to the point where you're so anti-religion that you think that anything that's supernatural or can't be explained is just supernatural and is just bullshit. And so I think that's where that comes from. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I think that science can be as dogmatic as religion,
Absolutely.
Easily, and can be, religion demands blind faith, right? Dogmatic science demands blind faith. But the thing is, science should not, by its very nature, science should reject faith, because the whole notion of science is that what we know about the world is based on evidence, and faith gets in the way of that. Science is a way to get verifiable answers out of nature about the way things are. And when you start accepting scientific dogma, you've essentially turned science into a religion, and that's not what it is. That's not what it should be. I do think, though, that many scientists have no consciousness of this. They don't think about it. Anytime a scientist tells you that they have, we pretty much have it all figured out, there's a few T's to cross and a few I's to dot, but we got this thing figured out. That to me is an example of such ignorance and such a failure to appreciate the limitations of what we know, that it's sad because you're cutting yourself off. In fact, one of the thing about science is we know very little about the totality of reality. We have this little group, this little collection of, what we think we know about how things are. Well, they had that figured out in the 19th century too, and in the 18th century, and in the 17th century, and it all got turned over, right? It all got completely undermined and destroyed because the evolution of thought, the evolution of understanding, continues. And so, that's how science works when it's supposed to work. That's how science is supposed to work. It constructs theories, it constructs hypotheses about how things are, about some process, some aspect of reality. Then if it's doing its job, it tries like hell to overturn that hypothesis. So it does not accept things on faith if it's working correctly. It's the job of scientists to question everything and to never forget how little they know. I mean, there's no place in science for arrogance. That's the thing. And when I hear somebody make a statement like that, I see arrogance, which means that you haven't been paying attention. Number one, you haven't taken psychedelics. Number two, you're accepting a lot of stuff on faith, and there's no place for faith in science, I believe. It's anathema to science. And one of the problems, I would say, there are many problems with science, like all our institutions. Many scientists in their training, they are never required to take courses in philosophy of science. And I can say this because half my academic background is philosophy of science. But I think it's important that they do because it forces them to think about what science is and what this thing really is that they're doing. And at base, it's the search for truth, it's the search for real knowledge. And they lose sight of that. Oh, science is about publishing papers, having graduate students, getting grants, going to conferences, giving lectures, doing experiments, and doing science where we may or may not really question, what we're doing or what's the significance of this. It's not about that. It's not about any of that. Big science almost forces you to work within that framework, but at bottom, science is an extremely powerful tool for understanding nature, but in order to do that, to achieve complete understanding, you have to reject faith. And so, so scientists should keep in mind, always keep in front of their mind or in the back of their mind or somewhere in their mind about how little we know. And this is one of the lessons I always get consistently from psychedelics, especially ayahuasca. It always says, remember how little you know. Remember that you're a monkey. Remember that you don't know shit, basically. Yeah, that's what it tells me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that.
So be humble and be happy too. That means there's so much left to know, and it means the world's a lot more marvelous and beautiful and miraculous than you ever imagined. When people think, well, we have this all tied up, it's a nice neat package. No, somebody next week is going to come along and pull the ribbon, and that whole package is going to come loose, and we have many, many, many things to discover.
Absolutely. And I think that's a positive thing. I think it's amazing how little we still understand. And you get people talking about quantum physics and all these things that just make zero sense to me, but are still very interesting because it shows how little we still understand. And it's what reality is. And I think it's easy to start sounding like a hippie at Woodstock and talk about what reality is. But it's serious. I mean, when you really dissect it, I mean, there's that show Brain Games, which has gotten quite popular with the host Jason Silva, which I love. And Jason goes through all these things, how he basically on this show plays tricks on your mind, and you realize that it's all just perception. It's your mind taking in information and then coming up with the what you're seeing and molding what you're seeing. But it's all input, and it's a lot of it's your brain's jumping to conclusions in many cases, because it's just taking in a certain amount of information and coming to the conclusion that this is this and that is that. And so there's a lot of different ways of being tricked and how your brain works that we still don't understand.
This goes back again to what we were talking about, which is that, exactly. The brain is an organ that tries to make sense of the world. It looks for patterns. And it's made out of drugs, right? And we're on drugs because we're made out of drugs all the time. So what the brain does essentially is synthesize a hallucination that we call reality. And it's our model of the world. And it makes sense most of the time. So it's useful. But we should remember that it's not reality, that it's a model. It's a model of reality that we construct based on sensory neural input from the outside, this processing function that the brain does, the association cortex, and then our knowledge and everything else that we might bring to it, memories and so on. So it is, again, it's important to remember that the brain is an imperfect filter, that what you're perceiving as ordinary reality is in fact your construction of reality. Well,
absolutely.
I call that a hallucination, essentially.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I remember talking to this kid who we were at the gym and we're talking. He's a born again Christian, and he talked about how he doesn't drink, he doesn't do any of these things because he doesn't want to input something that changes the way he looks at things. And I'm just like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, how much sleep you get affects the way the chemicals react in your body. What you eat changes your cognitive function. I'm like, everything you do has a reaction. Your environment, from how much oxygen is in this room, I mean, from the quality of oxygen to if you exercise, it affects your serotonin levels. And so all these things have a chemical effect on you. So this idea that you don't drink or do drugs, because I hate using the word drugs because I mean it's what people think it's bad, but for lack of a better term, you don't do drugs because you don't want something to change your perspective is ridiculous, because everything you do is having a chemical effect on you and is changing your perspective in some way or another.
It's all neurochemistry, right?
Exactly,
I mean, we're biochemical engines. We are made of drugs. So we're on drugs all the time. I mean, we're systems that are regulated by neurotransmitters, enzymes, hormones, all this stuff. Take those things out of the body and they would be called drugs.
Absolutely, yeah.
So they are drugs. I mean, we're on drugs. And this gentleman has obviously never thought very deeply about this, but if he did, he would maybe come to the conclusion that, because as you say, how much sleep you get, what you had for breakfast, what you're going to have tonight, what all of these things are going to affect the sort of overall homeostatic state of your mind body, which can't really be separated and can't really, they can't really be separated. Everything you do affects this system as a whole, and that's going to affect your consciousness. You can't get away from it. We're on drugs all the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's just the way it is.
Absolutely. Well, I won't take up too much of your time because we've been talking for quite a bit, and I always tend to forget to ask the guests how much time they have. But thank you so much, Dennis. I'm a huge fan. I'm always looking forward anytime I see your name pop up on any podcast or any interview. and or see your face in any documentary. I think that you are a perfect spokesperson for this, because you really blur the line between science and people who are interested in these type of things. So you have the resume to be respected in the science realm, but yet you have the balls to experiment with this stuff too, and really look at things from different perspectives and really question even what you know and what consciousness is. So I think it's awesome. Your book, The Brotherhood of a Screaming Abyss, I know can be found on Amazon and on your website, I believe, of the same title, right?
And without the in front of it.
Oh,
just
okay.
Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. But if you Google it, it'll show up.
Yeah.
And it's on Amazon. Thanks for plugging that.
And also,
and thanks for this interview. This has been great. This is the kind of interview I really enjoy.
Thank you.
Because you do a good interview, and obviously we barely touched the surface.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to come back on. I mean, I really like your style and the way that you've got an active mind, man, and that's really important.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I think my biggest flaw is that I suck at interviews. because you know what it is. A lot of these topics I try to have people on that I'm a fan of, and so I don't just have people on because I think that they're gonna get hits or people are gonna find them interesting. It's because I find them interesting, and for my own selfish reasons, I get to have a conversation with somebody that I'm a fan of their work. So to me, it's much more like a conversation. Like I'm excited to have this conversation. It's like hanging out. If we're hanging out at a pub and having some drinks and bullshitting about these interesting topics. So it's almost like being able to have a casual conversation if we were friends, and not so much like an interview like thing. And the thing I suck at the most is the interview part of it. If sometimes I struggle with a guest to maybe break that border of making the conversation feel more casual, then I'll struggle, because I'm not. If I was in I guess mainstream media or on a show where I had to ask questions, I would suck at that, because I would stutter more than I already do. I would trip over my words. My brain scatters way too much, and I would struggle. But this is what I found I was the best at. Is just the ability to have a conversation. It's what I enjoy, and that's why this podcast is called The Ripple Effect, because I truly believe in the idea of even something as simple as sparking conversation or sharing an interesting conversation can go a long way. It causes this ripple. If somebody's going to listen to this who didn't know anything about DMT or the benefits of these drugs and plants, and maybe they'll look into it, and then they'll have a conversation with somebody, and they'll have a conversation with somebody else. And I think that we have to. I mean, I started this podcast.
That's the way it works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So where does this go? Where does this podcast get?
Well, it's everywhere. It's
distributed.
The beautiful thing about the internet is that I have a little studio in my basement, and I actually created a studio for my music project, but got so obsessed with podcasting that thing's taken kind of the back seat to podcasting. But the beautiful thing about podcasting is that before you had domestic radio where you were heard locally, and now with podcasting it gets heard everywhere. I can go online, I can go on my website, I can literally zoom into, it looks like Google Maps, and I can zoom into every country and see even certain cities in the country where it's being downloaded. And this podcast is downloaded everywhere from Egypt to, funnily enough, the country I was born in, Portugal, apparently aren't big fans of podcasts, because it's probably one of the countries that I don't get a whole lot of downloads in. But everything from Egypt to Morocco to Mozambique to Russia, Germany, Italy, like South America, Brazil, all these places all over the world get access to this, minutes after I uploaded, and it's amazing the reach we have, and that's the beautiful thing about the internet, is that you can do that. I mean, Joe Rogan, what he does is amazing. I mean, he exposed me to a lot of stuff. I mean, I loved his casualness of his show, and I know via Skype it's much harder to capture a casual conversation. I think you lose something, when you're in person. It seems much more casual. You're in person, you can see social cues. You can kind of there's an energy that you kind of lose through Skype. But he was my influence, because I love that sense of having this casual conversation instead of you going, hearing Dennis on a very traditional interview where they ask you get somebody who probably just read your Wikipedia and just asks you the traditional, the typical questions, and then you're going to have very much of the same type of answers. There's something that you got on a Joe Rogan podcast because it was unscripted, because it was casual. You didn't have any guidelines to where the conversation had to go. You went wherever the conversation went. And then that would bring you into realms that you might have never imagined you were going to go into. So that's what I loved, and I think what he does is amazing because he exposes people to all these interesting topics and subjects. And I'm doing my part in trying to do the same thing. I've been very lucky that because of the internet, I started a podcast in my basement, and now I'm 2 years later I'm talking to Dennis McKenna, and I've had Jesse Ventura on, who's the governor of your state, and I've had people like the Rick Ross, who is a part of the Iran Contras, and Abraham Bolden, the first Black Secret Service agent, and then people, all different types of people, historians, and Daniele Bignelli, and all these, Dan Carlin, and all these really interesting. And one of the things I'm the most passionate about is these type of topics, and I haven't had that many people on. There has been this weird thing where I was going to get Mitchell Gaynor on, who's a doctor that you might be familiar with, but he's big into alternative medicines, and which I hate using alternative because they really were the original medicines, so maybe we should call them original medicines. And
maybe so, yeah.
And he had a mysterious death, and there's these weird just deaths and mysterious deaths with people who are in alternative medicine. Maybe it's just the conspiratorial side of me looking too far into it, but there's a whole lot of money to be made in big pharma and medicine. I mean, if a cure became mainstream today for cancer, all those pharmaceutical companies would be losing profit. All those companies that make those machines would be losing profit. The whole sections of the hospitals that focus on cancer treatment would be out of money and jobs. And I think that once you create this machine where you look at how much money, if we could do the math and had all the research to basically figure out all the money that goes to cancer research, and then we look at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago, and still we're giving the same chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. It's same three solutions, but yet all this money is going into cancer research. And most of the time, all these big institutes and stuff like that, a lot of cures and great ideas have been developed by individuals. They haven't been by big institutes and big nonprofit organizations. A lot of the breakthrough ideas have been discovered by individuals, and so all this money goes towards it, and we've had very little to any actual progression in our cancer research, and so it's these things really, because we all have family members that have died. Your sadly your brother, my mother-in-law recently, who just died a week or two ago. And so we've all had loved ones so we're all affected by this, and it's to me it's such an important issue because it just, again, like I said, we're all affected by it, and the fact that there's any information out there that could possibly be of some use or of some help, and yet it's being suppressed, or we're not being told about those options or alternatives, it drives me fucking crazy. It does. And when you hear stories about family members in New Jersey who have children who can't get marijuana or any type of hemp products because Chris Christie wants won't let them, and they have a child that their quality of life is horrendous because they can't get this natural plant, it drives me fucking insane. And I think when you hear stories like that and you see things like that, and I mean, hats off to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is a mainstream doctor and completely changed his opinion on marijuana and did the 2 documentaries on it. I give him a lot of props for that, because for him to come out publicly and say I was wrong, and I was listening to what the government was telling me, and that it was a Schedule 1 drug and all this stuff, I give him a lot of props. And so I mean, I think that's why these topics are so important, and I think that's why your work is so important.
And he changed his mind based on science, based on evidence, right? He looked at evidence and he changed his mind. That's the power of science,
Absolutely.
But you're doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. I really have enjoyed this. We've covered many topics, and I'm I'm happy to come back again. I mean, like I say, I think we've barely touched the surface. And you and I, in another occasion, maybe over the weekend, we can do a little Zoom demo between us.
Yeah, definitely.
I can show you how it works. But thank you so much for this. This has been great. I've had a wonderful time.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. So the podcast will be available on iTunes and anywhere, any podcast app. I know some people use different, like Stitcher or whatever. I use Podcast Addict for Androids, but it's also going to be available on YouTube. So if people want to watch it there, obviously these things are a little long, so I think it's more convenient to listen to them while commuting or traveling. So most people download them, but so it's available everywhere. I'll send you the links once it's up and live, and feel free to share it, or if you want to listen to it again or whatever, post it anywhere. It's open source. I don't make any money off this, so people can post it anywhere they want. Put this stuff out there. I mean, the important part to me is just getting the information and sparking the conversation. So that's the goal.
Yeah.
At the end of this podcast, I'll put the song that I actually sample you in, because I have you in there. I have Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock, a bunch of people that I think are really spokespeople for these topics and these subjects, and really hopefully are really changing people's consciousness and the way they look at the world and the stuff that we've been told, the propaganda we've been sold. So thanks so much, Dennis. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll definitely have you on again very soon, and I'll send you those links.
Send me the links and I'll put them on my Facebook page at least. Yeah.
Okay.
So good to talk, and all the best.
Thank you, Dennis. Thanks for your time.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
types of experiences a threat to the status quo. It motivates us to change the way we are, to change the way we relate to the world.
And we're no longer good producer consumers. We don't fit into the